Okay, so let's dive right in to this report about Canada's public equity markets.
Sounds good.
Like, imagine, this future where Canada's just teeming with global companies,
Right,
but like companies that we built right here,
right.
you know, and a tech scene that rivals Silicon Valley,
Hmm.
and, Canadians can invest in these success stories early on.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the dream,
it
right?
is a dream. And this report really kind of takes us down a different path
To a different
to a
reality.
different reality. Yeah. We're talking about a decline in Canada's public equity markets. Fewer companies are going public. More and more companies are selling to foreign buyers.
Yeah.
And, this has a ripple effect on everyone.
Yeah, and it's something that impacts all of us, from like job opportunities
Yeah.
to even just like general economic growth.
Cool, yeah.
And the numbers are pretty startling. Did you know that the number of companies listed on the TSX has been cut in half in just 15 years?
I mean, yeah, that's a huge decline. And what's even more striking is that it's not just companies leaving the market, it's that new companies aren't stepping up to take their place.
Yeah.
It's a real loss for Canada. I mean, we're talking about potentially losing head offices, those high-paying jobs.
Right.
And it's the opportunity for Canadians to benefit from the success of our own homegrown companies.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
So what's driving this decline? The report, it digs into some key factors.
Right.
And one that really jumped out at me was this concept of the fixed cost burden that's associated with going public.
Yeah, that's a huge barrier. Imagine a promising tech startup, right? They're facing, let's say, $500,000 in regulatory fees even before they launch their IPO.
Wow.
I mean, for smaller companies,
That's a lot.
it's a massive barrier. It's like trying to open a restaurant, but you have to pay for a year's worth of rent and supplies before you even serve a customer.
Yeah, it creates this situation where really only the already well-funded companies can even consider going public.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting how the report kind of connected this to the challenges of the knowledge economy.
Right.
Can you kind of talk about that a little bit more?
Well, in a knowledge economy, especially in the tech sector, they need less capital in the early stages so they can get off the ground with a great idea and a talented team.
Right.
But this can lead them to delay going public,
Yeah.
which in turn makes it harder for them to access larger sums later on when they actually need it to really scale up and compete globally.
So it's like a catch-22. They need more capital to grow.
Yeah,
But going public to get that capital becomes harder the longer they wait.
it's a tough spot to be in.
Um, the report also talked about the rise of private capital as a factor in this decline. So more companies are turning to private markets for funding, but that has its own set of trade-offs.
Of course. Private markets offer some advantages, speed, flexibility, things like that.
Right.
But often they lack the liquidity and transparency of public markets. So it can be harder for investors to exit their investments, and there's less regulatory oversight.
It almost seems like this shift towards private markets is contributing to the decline of the public markets and creating kind of like a self-reinforcing cycle.
It could be. One of the other interesting things the report brings up is the role of government.
Okay.
They suggest that government subsidies and direct investment might actually be crowding out
Oh, wow.
private risk capital.
So like by the government providing so much funding themselves,
Yeah,
they're actually discouraging private investment and kind of creating this dependency
right.
that could hurt innovation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine a garden where only the plants that get watered directly from a hose can survive.
Right.
The others, they're competing for that natural rainfall. They might wither.
So are we saying that government support should be completely eliminated?
No, not necessarily. I think it's about finding that right balance.
Yeah.
The report highlights the massive costs of these government subsidies.
And the potential for misallocation of capital. Could that money be used more effectively to create a level playing field
Right.
and actually incentivize private investment?
I think the core issue is, ensuring that the government actions are actually strengthening the ecosystem for innovation instead of creating an over-reliance on public funding.
Exactly. It's about
Yeah.
creating an environment where businesses can thrive
Yeah.
and they attract investment based on their merit and their potential, not their ability to get government support.
Okay, so we've kind of outlined the problem. Canada's public markets are facing a serious challenge. There are a number of contributing factors.
Right.
Now let's shift gears and explore some of the potential solutions. What does the report suggest?
Well, one idea is to tackle that fixed cost burden head on. So move away from fixed regulatory costs
Okay.
towards a more variable system that doesn't penalize those smaller companies.
So it's about creating a more level playing field where the cost of entry isn't such a deterrent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They even give the example of TMX data links, which currently has a monopoly on a lot of this essential market data. And this lack of competition drives up costs for everybody. So the report suggests, what if we open source this data, you foster competition, lower costs, and it makes the market more accessible?
Yeah, I like that. It's like breaking down a wall that was preventing these smaller players from entering the game.
Exactly.
What other solutions does the report propose?
Another intriguing one is the creation of what they call a middle-tier market. This would be specifically for private companies.
Yeah.
It would have greater transparency and liquidity than traditional private markets. And that gives investors more options, and it provides companies with more pathways to growth.
So it's almost like this stepping stone for companies that aren't quite ready for a full IPO,
Yeah.
but they need access to more sophisticated investors and capital.
Exactly. More options and flexibility for both companies and investors. And this kind of ties into the report's overall recommendation, which is to rethink the government's role in the market.
Okay. So before we dive into that, I want to highlight something that actually wasn't mentioned in the report,
Oh, okay.
but that I think could play a vital role in addressing some of these challenges.
Okay.
And that's a platform called SteerUp.
Okay.
So before we get back to those suggestions from the report about the government's role, let's take a quick detour and introduce our listeners to SteerUp. Stay tuned. Welcome back.
Yeah.
So before the break, we were talking about some of the challenges facing Canada's public markets and some potential solutions that this report kind of outlines.
Right.
We also teased a platform called SteerUp,
Yes.
which, while it wasn't actually mentioned in the report, I think offers a really unique approach to potentially revitalizing these markets.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's unpack SteerUp. What is it and how can it help?
So SteerUp is a really interesting platform. It's an equity and debt crowdfunding platform that connects startups with everyday investors like you and me,
Got it.
and experienced lead investors as well. So think of it as a way to democratize access to startup investing and create a more vibrant market.
So it's not just about like increasing the number of companies seeking funding, but also broadening the pool of investors.
Exactly. And that aligns with the report's emphasis on creating a more inclusive and accessible market.
Okay.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about SteerUp is that it really fosters that market-based growth
Yeah.
rather than relying on government subsidies. So it empowers companies to stand on their own 2 feet, attract investment based on their merit,
Right.
and compete on a global stage.
And that really resonates with the concerns that the report brought up about like crowding out from government.
Yes.
And this potential for, creating a dependency on public funding.
Ab-
So SteerUp is really focused on, a sustainable ecosystem where companies can thrive independently.
Yeah. And, it could potentially help to keep Canadian companies Canadian-owned for longer as well.
How so?
Well, by providing access to a broader pool of investors,
Okay.
it could reduce the pressure on those startups to seek those early exits through acquisitions by foreign buyers.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So it helps to keep those head offices here, those
Yep.
high-paying jobs, and that innovative spirit in Canada.
So how does it actually work? You mentioned like lead investors and retail investors. Can you kind of walk me through like the roles they play?
Yeah, of course. So think of lead investors as like those experienced guides in the startup world. They have that proven track record, deep industry knowledge, and they can identify those promising startups with high growth potential.
Okay.
So they curate selections of these startups for retail investors to consider.
So it's almost like having an expert do the due diligence for you and handpick investment opportunities.
Exactly. And these lead investors, they don't just offer advice, they actually put their own money on the line alongside those retail investors.
Okay.
So it aligns their incentives, ensures everyone is working towards the same goal.
That's a really important detail.
Right.
It builds that trust and demonstrates that you're all kind of committed to the success of it.
Exactly.
So we have these curated lists of startups vetted by these lead investors. What happens next?
So SteerUp then opens up those investment opportunities to its community of retail investors.
Okay.
And the key here is accessibility. So retail investors can participate with as little as $500.
Wow.
It's breaking down those barriers that traditionally exclude everyday investors from the startup world.
It's democratizing access to something that was once, reserved for a select few. I really like that. But it's not just about giving the retail investors a chance to participate.
Right.
It also benefits the startups.
Right. Absolutely. By working with retail investors early on, those startups, they gain valuable experience in communicating with a broader investor base
Right.
and managing those relationships effectively. It's almost like a boot camp for public markets.
Yeah.
It prepares them for the scrutiny and accountability that comes with going public later on.
It sets them up for success from day one. That's really cool.
Exactly.
Now, what about the lead investors, though? What motivates them to participate in this? Because it seems like a lot of work up front.
Yeah, it's a good question. So SteerUp helps them to increase their investment capacity. So by amplifying their reach through this platform, they can potentially invest in more deals and manage their risk more effectively. So think of it as leveraging the power of the crowd.
So it really is a win-win for everybody.
Yeah.
Startups get access to that funding, mentorship, lead investors can expand their reach and their influence, and retail investors can get involved in the world of startup investing.
And by fostering this kind of collaborative approach, SteerUp could contribute to a stronger pipeline of companies for Canada's public markets in the long run. So these companies, they'd be better prepared, more experienced in investor relations, and more attractive to a wider range of investors.
It's almost like planting seeds for that, vibrant public market of the future.
Exactly.
So where are they at in terms of development? Like, are they up and running?
So they're currently in the post-validation phase, getting ready to launch their MVP, their minimum viable product.
Yeah.
They do have a landing page where you can sign up to stay informed and be one of the first to know when the platform goes live.
Awesome. So it's really exciting to see these kinds of innovative solutions emerging,
It is.
Gives me hope that we can reverse some of these concerning trends we've been talking about.
Absolutely. It's a real testament to that ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit that we have here in Canada.
Yeah. Okay, so let's circle back to the report for a second. And those potential solutions that we touched on earlier, we're about to dive into those recommendations for rethinking the government's role.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the report does a good job of emphasizing the need for a balanced approach. So one that leverages the strengths of both the public and private sectors. It's not about eliminating government support completely,
Right.
but rather ensuring that it's there to complement a thriving private market and not replace it.
So creating that synergy where government actions are actually supporting the health of the market and incentivizing private investment.
Exactly. Reducing crowding out,
Yeah.
focusing on policies that support long-term market health, and really avoiding that temptation to pick winners and losers.
Yeah.
It's about creating a level playing field where companies can compete based on what they bring to the table and not their ability to get funding from the government.
I think that's a key takeaway. We've explored these challenges. We've
Yes.
talked about potential solutions. We even looked at a platform like SteerUp that could play a role
Absolutely.
in shaping a brighter future for Canada's public markets. But it really is up to all of us to be informed, engaged, and proactive in supporting Canadian innovation.